I start with the NFC North. Your number one seed, Detroit Lions. Best case, worst case for Detroit Lions. JP, what do you think?
My best case scenario for the Lions is talented roster weathers the storm, but the worst case scenario is the offensive and defensive brain drain are too much to make up. And it's tough for the Lions because you can say like, yeah, this team still has a lot of talent, plus the positive injury regression where not everybody is going to fall apart by week 13, but you just worry about all of the brain drain coming from the offense, all the brain drain coming from the defense. Frank Ragnow retiring is going to be really huge for that offense, but I still think that this team is too talented to kind of just completely fall apart. But if there is a worst case scenario, it is just all of the names, all the ideas going into the room and into the game plan on both sides of the ball. Just you can't make up for that.
I like the phrase you used, brain drain there. And there's going to be a lot of that. But one thing that I had here in my notes is that this is a team whose identity is don't blink, regardless of what's happening around you. You know, it's something my dad used to tell me. Even if the sky is falling around you as a player, you just keep swinging your sword. Eventually, they'll come get you off the field. That's kind of what Dan Campbell has instilled in this team. And regardless of what the X's and O's are going to be, we can set our watch to the fact this is going to be a team that performs at a tough level. But my questions are about the health coming into the season. What versions are the defensive players coming back off of injury going to be, and can they carry that out? We know injuries are going to be sustained throughout the season. How much are we going to get back from last year's injuries for this defense?
And I'll say this, as much as, you know, I think we give Dan Campbell a lot of credit for instilling that sort of confidence, instilling that mantra in that team. Brad Holmes has drafted players that also, you know, like sometimes you can say that all you want. If it falls on deaf ears, no one's going to listen. But he has guys on that team that like live that sort of mantra, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like Aiden Hutchinson, like Brian Branch. Like this is a team built with leaders that aren't just going to let it fall off a cliff. So I do think what I'm the most worried about is just Jared Goff without Ben Johnson. Like that's it. It's you go back. My comp I've been saying all offseason is 2017 Falcons. 2016 Falcons led the number one offense in the NFL, 33.8 points per game, went to the Super Bowl. Matt Ryan wins the MVP. You bring everyone back, and I would say Matt Ryan is a better quarterback than even Jared Goff. Bring everyone back. It's supposed to be run back, but you don't have Kyle Shanahan the next year. You had Steve Sarkisian. All of a sudden, you go 33.8 points per game, 22.1. It's like, why did it get bad? What happened? Well, it's like sometimes, especially in the NFL, when it's like the edges are super small and you got to be at the cutting edge every single time, especially from a play calling perspective. If you just don't have that guy, you got a first-time play caller and John Morton doing it, it might just not look the same. So the best case scenario I have is that talent is more important than coaching. I think it is at the end of the day. I think we see that with the Philadelphia Eagles last year a lot of the times. But still, I think you'll see a bit of a step back. So the team that was the dominant one seed, I think just becomes one of many kind of vying and nipping at the Eagles' heels now in the NFC. All right, let's get the Vikings. Best and worst case scenario.
My best case scenario is the offensive line takes a step forward to match the skill position groups. But my worst case scenario is JJ McCarthy isn't good enough. And I think for the worst case scenario, I kind of oscillated between JJ McCarthy isn't good enough versus JJ McCarthy isn't ready. And I think there's a difference between both of those where if he's not ready, you can say, okay, we're just going to go into next year because his team is kind of built for the long haul to be QB proof. You know, you can kind of say, all right, he isn't ready yet. He doesn't have the reps. We just say this season is a wash. We'll come back next year. But if he's not good enough, you're thinking about the future implications. You're thinking about the fact that you spent a whole lot of picks to trade up and get the guy. You spent a lot of time going back and forth between he and Sam Darnold when Sam Darnold played really well in the offense. But if he's not good enough, you're thinking, oh, we might have messed up here. We might have spent a whole lot of capital on a guy that just isn't here to do what we need him to do. But I think best case scenario, you know, I say QB proof. I think the Vikings are the most pinnacle example of a QB proof offense. You have the play calling. I think the offensive line additions kind of lean me more towards, like last year, they were the purest distillation of the wide zone bootleg stuff. And I think they actually kind of lean more into the gap, the more duo, power, counter stuff. And I think adding guys like Donovan Jackson in the first round, I think he kind of leans towards that a little bit more. So I'm really interested to see what their offense looks like with McCarthy under center. But I think the worst case scenario is you leave this season with more questions than answers about your starting quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on this being a team that is quarterback proof. And there's, maybe one other team in the NFL. And the one that keeps coming to my mind is the Philadelphia Eagles. We've seen it time and time again. And it's taking nothing away from Jalen Hurts. I'm just saying, great cast of characters around you. That's what they've done in Minnesota. Look, best case scenario, they still give you nightmares on defense. They dominate the line of scrimmage on the offensive line, and they win on the outside. And J.J. McCarthy is able to play a little bit of point guard early in the season. Worst case scenario is that he hits the ground not running, and he's a deer in the headlights. But I would push back on the fact that they're going to, punt essentially to next year. This offense will grow throughout the season because of the reps that he's getting. You take a look at a guy like Caleb Williams at the end of the year versus the beginning of the year and the progression. Worst case scenario is it starts slow, but it is going to get faster. It's Kevin O'Connell. It's Justin Jefferson. It's that quarterback proof roster. I'm excited to watch this Vikings group. A lot of questions, but I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the point you made there about if they run more duo something different, because the additions they made, especially on the interior, speak to that. But then they traded Jordan Mason, who's like an awesome outside zone runner. Aaron Jones is like, I love watching him run outside zone. The ferocity, just like the pacing that he has in his runs is so damn good. So we'll be interested to see if they change that up. But it's just, I think this one is one of the easiest ones to say. They're like, the best case scenario is that, hey, they added 3 guys to their offensive line, 2 guys to their defensive interior that were already, I guess the offensive line wasn't good, but the defensive line was already good. Like pushing these units to what could be high heights, but it really is just, who the hell is J.J. McCarthy? Because as much as it's QB-proof offense, I saw how Jaron Hall looked in this offense. It can stink too. Like a quarterback still, when you don't know what he's going to look like, especially someone like J.J. McCarthy, who was such a weird prospect coming out of Michigan with not a lot of reps to his name, with pretty much pure projection in terms of if you wanted high-end quarterback play, you were just going to have to look to a few reps from a few games and not really sustain success in the passing attack. So that to me is a pretty easy one for the Minnesota Vikings. So let's, with that, move on to the Green Bay Packers, where I have a lot riding on this one, JP. I'm a Packers shareholder. I don't know if you know that. I'm a Packers fan. I'm from Wisconsin originally. So give me your best and worst case scenario here.
So my best case scenario is they have the best offense in the NFL and the defense creates enough chaos. And then the worst case scenario is the lack of pass rush because sinks the defense. And I think best case scenario, I mean, you got to start with the offense. I think that with another year of growth from the receivers, I think adding Matthew Golden is going to really help kind of give you more explosiveness downfield with a guy who has really sure hands. I think the speed kind of stands out with most guys with Matthew Golden, but for me, it was the focus and the concentration on those deep passes from Texas. I think that's going to really help this offense remain explosive. I actually really like what Matt LaFleur did in this offense, which is our quick game is the run game. You don't have to worry about throwing checkdowns. You're just going to throw the ball 40 yards downfield. And in the defense, creating enough chaos, I'm just thinking of the second half of the season where Jeff Hafley really kind of found out what worked for this defense, and they're able to win the turnover battle. You're able to win in those margins to get the ball back to the offense. But worst case scenario, they were 26 in the NFL in pass rush win rate. I think Edgerrin Cooper is great as a blitzer, but you cannot always rely on your off-ball linebacker to be the best blitzer, be the best pass rusher on the team. They need to get something from their pass rush this season to win with 4 in order to help out their pass coverage a little bit. So that's really like my worst case scenario is their pass rush just kind of sinks the defense overall.
Yeah, I mean, they're some of the superstars up front there. Some of the guys that they've relied on they're getting up there in age. They're about my age. I remember playing against some of these guys, and I'm an old head. I haven't had hair since 2013. But I will say about this offense, I have loved the receivers in that room, but they have really been missing a je ne sais quoi. And with Matthew Golden, I feel like they may have found it. If Jordan Love can stay healthy, if he can get into that flow state as a quarterback, what we've seen, like 6 games in a row, 5 games in a row, you're like, oh my God, go watch week 4 to week, Jordan Love can put those things together. And if you can put multiple of those things together because of his health, it can be what JP said. This Packers offense may be the best offense in football. And that could be disgusting for a guy like me to watch. I would hate to see that. And, kind of get Jordan Love off the screen writhing in pain. I hate to see that too. I almost hate to see my enemy's team with their quarterback down. I just hate seeing injured players. But at the end of the day, Halfley, are you going to get the most out of your guys on the edge? Are you going to be able to cause havoc in a division where the quarterbacks are pretty darn good and there's some playmakers? Caleb Williams is going to be getting better. You better beat the Bears at home. Worst case scenario, the Bears finish above the Packers and they beat them at Lambeau. That's worst case scenario for the Packers, I would imagine.
I mean, that would be a nightmare scenario.
On Brett Favre's jersey retirement night. You remember that one?
So we don't have to go back in time. We're looking forward, Kyle. We don't have to go back to your glory days here. I'll say this. I completely agree with the assessment of the offense. This has potential to be the best offense in the NFL. One of the biggest strengths Jordan Love has is that he will give his guys chances. The problem has been he has had super inconsistent wide receivers. And they've been young, right? First and second year guys. They've been super young. They're now either in the third or fourth year, that entire group. Hopefully that inconsistency goes away. And you hopefully now, if you have a guy who, when you give him chances, and from what I've heard out of Packers training camp, Matthew Golden has been making plays when given 50-50 balls, things of that nature, where it's like, maybe it's not quite open, but Matthew Golden's going to fight to go get the football. They just haven't had that guy. Unfortunately, he's trusted Christian Watson on too many occasions to be that guy. And it's led to some picks and some bad plays over the years. But if you get that guy, it could look like, the stretches they've had of dominance. But the biggest thing is the defense. If the defensive line doesn't get better, if they can't rush the passer, you can only rely on blitzing, scheming it up for so long. And especially with the state of the secondary, with the state of their cornerback position, they were a top 10 defense in terms of EPA per play last year. There's not really a metric outside of that, or like a position group outside of that. We can be like, yes, this was responsible. And that's why people are excited as heck about Jeff Halfley and the job he did. But talent still talks. And if you don't rush the passer, and if you can't do it consistently, especially with the improvements of that division now, with the Bears should be getting better, with the Vikings offensive line only looking better, it could ultimately return to mediocrity and ultimately sink the Packers season. Let's get the last one in the NFC North here. Kyle, we can start with you here, because the Chicago Bears, I need to hear your best and worst case scenario. Actually, I want to start with your worst case scenario, because you tend to view the Bears through rose-colored glasses, as you should. But what's like a realistic bad season for the Chicago Bears?
I wrote one sentence for worst case scenario for my Chicago Bears. Caleb continues to hold on to the ball. That's it.
Yep.
You can write the rest of that story as you want. But if Ben Johnson, who was created in Dexter's laboratory, can't come to Chicago and get this guy to get the football out of his hand. By the way, Mike will tell you, I may be the biggest Caleb Williams fan on planet Earth, except for Carl Williams, his father. And I would imagine his mother, who gets the tearful embrace from her son after losses. But get rid of the football. That solves so many issues for your offense. That's worst case scenario. And obviously a lot happens if you don't get rid of the football. Best case scenario, Caleb Williams establishes a sense of urgency, an internal clock. The Chicago Bears have an identity on offense. They maximize their draft capital with a great season from Colston Loveland, which puts the Bears offense on the map, because guys like Luther Burden are going to step up. They've had good camps already. Guys like DJ Moore are shoo-ins to be, like Terry McLaurin type. We can just throw it over there. He's going to be open. And then Rome Odunze making the next step. This could be the best offense in the NFC North if Ben Johnson gets rid of if Caleb Williams gets rid of the football in Ben Johnson's offense, which then puts the Green Bay Packers at the number 2 offense in the NFC North.
I think your point about getting the ball out is really interesting and really important in Ben Johnson's offense, because above all the trick plays, above all the really cool stuff Ben Johnson will draw up, the biggest thing that I noticed watching the Lions offense is the attention to detail. Everything is so to a point. And when you watch the Lions and you watch Jared Goff, he has such a good ability of getting from 1 to 2 to 3 because everything is so detailed. And hearing some of the reports out of Bears training camp with all the attention to detail that Ben Johnson wants, I think DJ Moore had mentioned, or like Luther Burden mentioned, like, I gotta run every time I make a mistake. And it kind of reminds me of that opening like speech from Remember the Titans, where it's like, we're going to be perfect. If you drop a pass, you run a mile. And that's exactly what needs to happen for this Bears offense that is still very young. And I think that attention to detail is going to really help the quarterback, because you hold on to the ball because you don't know the details of the offense. You don't know the fine workings, the ins and outs of, okay, this is going, here's where this goes. Here's where all the pieces fit together. So I think having Ben Johnson in his ear to be that, okay, here's the details of the offense, is going to really help him out.
Yeah, we discussed, I mean, the Bears offense lack of attention to detail quite a bit a year ago. I mean, even stuff as simple as just their zone steps, along the offensive line, and just not having like the same angles. It's just easy day one stuff.
It's like there's 4 voices that different guys hear. You need to have one voice. There needs to be one voice.
I do think that best case scenario is that, Caleb is who everyone thought he was going to be coming out. But then also he adds a rushing element to Ben Johnson's offense, an option game to Ben Johnson's offense that you didn't have with Jared Goff. It was the only team that was top 5 rushing offense in terms of EPA per rush last year that didn't have a mobile quarterback. That, like, his dominance that he's been able to scheme it up by just under center running game, hand it off, has been unique in today's NFL. And not only can you do that, you could now add a guy. You can get a number back in the running game, which is what option is all predicated on. So that is your best case scenario. And I do agree, like, the outcomes of this offense are all over the map. They no one bats an eye, I think, if they turn into a top 3 offense in the NFL. But it is just Caleb Williams, sack reduction, negative play reduction, what he did last year, because this wasn't as bad as Drake. As much as he took a bunch of sacks, right? Second most in the NFL, I believe. It wasn't as bad as what Drake May was dealing with along the offensive line. I don't even think, watching him on like obvious drop back scenarios, that it was as bad as what Jane Daniels was dealing with in Washington. I thought the Bears offensive line was okay, like winnable if you had the goods. Now it's going to be awesome, right? Now it's going to be a lot better even, but a lot of it, if you're saying, the sacks, it's going to get better, we improve the offensive line, a lot of it was just Caleb Williams a season ago. So that is what has to change.